A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome back, brothers and sisters, to another week of book review, going over the book entitled Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas, by the author Sylvain Diouf. And alhamdulillah, we're reviewing the second chapter tonight, or at least the first part of the second chapter, which is entitled Upholding the Five Pillars of Islam in a Hostile World. Upholding the Five Pillars of Islam in a Hostile World. So as the title of the chapter implies, this chapter talks a lot about the tactics and the various methods that captives employed in order to practice and preserve Islam in the Americas under chattel slavery in this country and throughout the diaspora. And so there were three, I would say, general principles, underlying principles that they employed in order to preserve their faith. The first was obviously to affirm Islam, that many of them were practicing Muslims in Africa before coming to the Americas. And so upon their arrival, one of the first things that they would do is they would affirm their faith and profess it openly. The second part was to reject the Christian faith that was being promoted by the captors, the slave masters. And finally, the last tactic was to pseudo-convert as a last resort. So in other words, if they could not openly affirm and practice Islam or outright reject Christianity, they would use a middle ground, if you will, to at least outwardly practice and accept this Christianity while maintaining their faith in their heart. And so the author starts out by giving personal accounts of a number of Muslims who were brought over. The first example was of a slave who was, his name was Job bin Solomon or Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. When he came to the Americas, the name Simon was assigned to him. So instead of being Suleiman or Solomon, he became Simon. And apparently he had escaped. He had escaped the plantation that he was enslaved on. And when he was found, the only words that he would utter was Allah Muhammad, Allah Muhammad. He could not speak English. He didn't understand the language. And so he would repeat Allah Muhammad, hoping that those people who found him would identify him as a Muslim, and hopefully he would be freed as a slave and not held in captivity. Unfortunately, that was not the case for him. Another example was a Muslim by the name of Umar ibn Said from Senegal, who was enslaved in North Carolina. He reportedly hand wrote Surah An-Nasr, the 110th surah of the Quran, that he wrote from memory. There's another famous Muslim, Bilali Muhammad, from Guinea Pulo, and he was in the Sea Islands of Georgia. And according to reports and testimonies, he died with shahada, that on his deathbed or very close to his death, he testified, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. And so, since the beginning of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, the European captors identified this problem of Islam, that the slaves, that the Africans that they brought over to serve as slaves, as servitude slaves, many of them were practicing Muslims. And so there was not a consensus on how to handle these Muslims coming from Africa. So you had two different approaches. The Catholics took the approach of conversion. They believed that baptizing the Africans and converting them to Christians, they found it to be a moral obligation and part of the process of administrating slaves. So in other words, they viewed Christianity as a way of controlling, or as a way of subduing the Africans and bringing them into the fold of slavery. And many of the slaves rejected this notion of becoming a Christian. They tried, to the best of their ability to maintain their Islam, but it was not an easy task, obviously. Some of them, for lack of a better term, they pretended not to understand that when Christianity was presented to them, they would play dumb and pretend that they could not understand or comprehend what was being presented or what was being proposed. And so what many of the Europeans found was that many of the non-Muslim Africans were more willing to accept Christianity, or at the very least, to adopt some of the Christian beliefs into their existing religion. So you found this split between non-Muslim Africans and Muslim Africans in terms of their acceptance or willingness to accept the Christian faith. There was also a Muslim by the name of Muhammad Gardo Bukwakwa. He landed in Brazil, in a place called Pernambuco, Brazil, and he, would write or talk or tell about the whippings that would occur when the Africans did not participate in the Christian faith or practice. So when they would hold church or what have you, if the slaves were found not to participate or accept, that they would be whipped even during the services. And so the interesting thing is that not all Europeans were Christians themselves. Some of the European captors had other faiths or religions that they were practicing. And during that time, the non-Catholic Europeans were allowed to continue practicing their faith in their homes. They were not allowed to practice openly in society, but rather they could continue their practice in their homes. But meanwhile, any religion outside of Christianity for slaves was considered illegal and punishable. And so the Muslims at that time were not able to practice or continue openly practicing their faith. The Protestants, on the other hand, had a different approach. They opposed conversions and baptisms because they feared that they could not justify enslaving their brothers in faith. And so they were decided that they would not spread Christianity to the captive slaves, or the heathens as they would refer to them, but rather they looked upon the Africans as less than human or less than equal to themselves, and therefore not qualified for the Christian faith. And so there was a split between the Catholics who pushed Christianity and tried their best to convert Africans to, or the Muslims into Christians. And then there was a Protestant approach, which deliberately did not spread Christianity to the African Muslims because of the logical conflict of how can a person be considered a brother in faith and an equal in the religion and yet be enslaved in society. So two very different approaches. The slaves who tried to convert under the Protestants were punished. And so if any African Muslim, or any African for that matter, African slave was found trying to practice Christianity, they were actually punished severely for doing so under the Protestants. And there were early reports and records of Muslims who tried to continue practicing Islam, throughout their experience here in the Americas. In fact, there were reports of Muslims observing Eid al-Adha even in the mid 1800s. I think it was 1844 that there was a group of Muslim Africans who were given access to a particular house in which they were slaughtering livestock in observance of Eid al-Adha in the 1800s. And so it was not until the 18th century that Protestants had what they termed as the Great Awakening, and they began forcing or pushing Christianity upon the slaves. And so they did eventually make the turn, but initially the Protestants did not did not follow or agree with the philosophy of pushing Christianity upon the African slaves. And so as a result of the Christian faith being promoted and pushed upon the Africans, you found that many of the African slaves, they would do what is called pseudo-conversions, in a sense where they would at least outwardly practice the Christian faith as a form of survival, as a survival mechanism, and to the best of their ability, maintain their faith in Islam, at least in their heart and secretly. So most of the conversions were not sincere. They would only convert to reduce any chance of punishment and outward difficulty or hardship, undue hardships as a result of their faith. And the author goes into some detail about different accounts from the Africans who were who suffered or who lived through this experience. One example was a Muslim by the name of Muhammad Kaba Saganogu from Futa Jalon, Guinea. And he was captured as a child while he was traveling to Timbuktu to visit his uncle, and he was later transported to Jamaica in 1777. When he was transported and enslaved, they renamed him, gave him the name Dick, and he was not released from slavery until 1834, in which he reverted back to Islam. So he spent the bulk of his adult life under servitude slavery and living as a Christian up until his latter years in life, and then he was able to travel back to Africa and also to practice Islam. And just to give a short account of his story, Muhammad Kaba Saganagu, on page 81, there's an excerpt that I wanted to read, inshallah. It says that the usefulness of Christianity, hence the insistence on conversions in support of slavery, was displayed in Kaba's responses. We must not steal from Massa. We must not run away and rob Massa of his work. We must not have two wives, for by and by they will get jealous and hurt one another, and Massa's work will fall back. We must pay for Bukra, or the overseer, and everybody. The missionary who reported the scene added sagaciously, these answers may be taken as a fair specimen of Negro ability and shrewdness. Kaba was shrewd indeed. 11 years later, he wrote in a Baptist Missionary Society notebook a 50-page treatise in Arabic on prayers, on Salah, Islamic prayers, not Christian prayers, and their rituals, as well as various topics, including marriage. So I wanted to read that because this was a excellent example of how the African slaves, the Muslim slaves, excuse me, would use pseudo-conversion, or at least outwardly appear to be practicing Christianity while inwardly maintaining their faith in Allah and their faith in Islam. And so there was another account of a woman by the name of Old Lizzie Gray. She passed away in 1860 in the state of South Carolina. She was born a Muslim, and she was forced to convert into a Methodist Christian. And she would famously say that Christ built the first church in Mecca, and he grave was DA, was DA. So I don't fully understand what that means, but what they would say is that God, they say, is Allah, and Jesus Christ is Muhammad. The religion is the same, but different countries have different names. So what the Muslims were doing in many cases were they would switch the names of the prophets, of the Anbiya, in order to conceal their real faith in Allah and to save themselves from undue punishment. And this was this was reported in many situations among many of the African slaves. Another example is a man, a Muslim by the name of Angelo Suleiman. He was born in 1721 as Madi Maki, or Mamadi. Madi Maki or Madi Mamadi. So he was captured at the age of 7, just in a war. So as a child, he was picked up as a captive of war. And just before his death, he reverted to Islam and took his Shahada and practiced Islam to the best of his ability. And the last example that I have, that I pulled from this reading, is about a Muslim. His name is Ibrahim Abdul Rahman Ibn Imam Ibrahim As-Suri. He pretended to accept Christianity in order to return to Africa, and late in life, he also died as a Muslim. And so we can find many examples of Muslims who, under the circumstances, they did the best that they could to hold on to their faith and to affirm Islam, and to reject the Christian faith that was being forced upon them. And in cases when they could not outright do those things, they did pseudo convert, or at least outwardly convert, and to the best of their ability maintain their faith in Allah in their heart. Um, and I just, just on a personal note or personal level, I would say, um, it really does. It really does cause me to reflect, and hopefully others to reflect on, uh, you know, our history in this country, and just to know that we are descendants of those Africans, many of whom were Muslims, and now generations later down the line, we have found our way back to Islam, and it's just a very humbling thing to reflect upon and to remember. And so, that's something that has heavily been on my mind as I continually read and learn from this work, this very important work. Alhamdulillah. And before we wrap up, inshallah, I wanted to make mention. I've been asked to make mention of an upcoming event. Um, it's a webinar event celebrating 4 years of convert empowerment by Embrace. This event is happening January 23rd, 2021, between 6 and 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And for more information, please visit the Embrace website or chat group in your local city, inshallah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in knowledge and understanding. And we ask Allah, Allah's help and protection from all manner of evil and threats to our faith and our iman. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shifa to anyone who's sick or anyone who is in need. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.